Welcome back. As we look at Chapter 5, which discusses literature reviews, how to find and critique evidence, we're going to look even deeper into research and the research questions. As usual, we start with the question. A research literature review is a written summary of an evidence on a research problem. And this is true. One of the things that when you're looking for a lit review, and you will create a mini lit review when you are doing the background section of any either QI project or research study, is to find what other studies have been done about your problem. So, purpose of a literature review: once you pose a research problem and research questions have been identified, the first thing you need to do is a thorough lit review. Lit reviews provide researchers and those looking at evidence-based practice with information to guide their study and make it high quality. One of the things that it's going to identify for you is the scope and complexity of your identified research problem. What other researchers have found in question to your research question. It's also going to look at the quality and quantity of the existing evidence that's out there in the literature. It'll look to see what context and what areas where research has been conducted, whether that's by community, by area of the country, or even as narrowed down to the unit where the research was conducted. It'll look at the characteristics of the people who served in the study as participants, what theoretical underpinnings were used, methodological strategies that have been used to address the question, gaps in the evidence, and the type of new evidence that is needed. So when we look at things like replicating a study, what has been done in the past and the way that the study was conducted will guide us in that next step. So, sources of information for a literature review. There's 3 different overarching categories of sources of information. Primary source research, which is essentially early studies written by researchers who conducted them, are what you're really looking for and are the gold standard. Secondary sources are descriptions of studies that are prepared by someone other than the original researcher. Literature reviews that you'll be conducting or are used as the background are considered secondary sources. If reviews are recent, they provide an overview of the topic and a valued bibliography. So one of the things that I have done throughout my career is I will find good studies, but I will look to see where their studies came from and where is that primary source that was essentially the gold standard that started their process. Secondary sources are not substitute for primary sources because they're typically not as detailed about those studies. And that's what I'm talking about. When you look at the background of a study and a primary study has been included, you're going to go and find that original study that was done, not just rely on what was written about that study. So next time you pick up a research journal, look at that background section. And what you'll notice is there will be references to all kinds of studies that have been done related to the topic at hand. And the last and least reliant are those anecdotal reports, opinion articles, or case reports. They're not technically research, but they may actually broaden the understanding of your problem. So question number 2, an ancestry approach uses pivotal studies to search forward to subsequent studies that has cited. And actually, an ancestry approach is tracking down those earlier studies, so this is false, cited in a reference list of a report. And the descendiary approach is using that pivotal study and then going forward looking at subsequent studies that cited it. So what I was describing is an ancestry approach. So I read an article, and it may not be the primary source, or it may not be the primary study that was done, and I will typically look backwards to see what original studies were done on that subject. Super useful approach. So when you look at search strategy options, you want to look both ways. You want to look for those early studies that were done, and then you want to see if you can get that primary study that was done on the primary study that was done on your topic. So bibliologic databases, which can search large groups of research, are really can be overwhelming. And the databases that you search in are searched for primarily key variables. So you don't want to use very narrow terms. You want to use a term that is going to keep growing your casting a wide net. So we'll often use words like falls if you're looking for falls research versus narrowing it down beyond that. You'll want to use many different terms that will, as I said, cast a wide net. So you may be looking at social determinants of health. So you may search determinants or health and see what, you'll start with a very large group and then really kind of narrow it down. And one of the most rich places to look is in bibliographies of studies or reference lists of studies where it's kind of hit the mark. And then don't forget to look beyond that. Other strategies may include something tracking down what is called gray literature, which refers to studies with more limited distribution, such as conference papers, unpublished reports, sometimes dissertations that have been created. Dissertations will give you a great place to start and really look back at what was the basis for their research study, depending on what kind of study it was. So different types of electronic databases, you can use keywords, you can search specific words in the text fields, and then you could look for a specific researcher. So when you look to find one researcher that has done multiple research studies on the same topic, using their name may actually be one of your best bets. I'm sure that this is not the first time you've heard of CINAHL and Medline. CINAHL is a great resource. It's a bibliographic database. Apparently I'm having trouble saying that word. It covers references virtually all in English. It includes nursing, allied health, books, dissertations, and it again casts a wide net. It will include links to full text journals and journal coverage. Another is Medline, and if you have not used Medline, it really was a database that was developed by the U.S. National Library of Medicine and is really a premier source for bibliographic coverage of the biomedical literature. It includes 5,600 medical journal and health journals, over 70 countries, and 28 million records going all the way back to the 1940s. In 1999, the systematic review library called the Cochrane Collaboration became available through Medline. Just an example of a reference printout from CINAHL and one from PubMed. And really what you want to do is once you have a useful set of source materials, you need to create a strategy of making sense of the information. You want to create tables or learn to code the studies, and there are multiple examples given in your book of how to set up summary tables and matrices related to literature review. Some common mistakes that I have made that you should learn from is somewhere you need to write down the full reference citation. You can do that in your table. I usually do it as a footnote to my table. I usually will look to see what best practices are available in setting up a lit review table and include those things such as study design, limitations, and there's a great example, like I said, there are a few of them, but there are some great examples in your textbook. Coding is super important, so if you are using abbreviated terms or you're coding the articles, please don't lose your coding reference sheet. So matrices are a convenient means of abstracting and organizing information for a lit review. So what is the purpose of the evaluation matrix? And like I said, you're really using that matrix to record methodological features of different studies. And you're using that to look for themes of what you've retrieved. So when you're doing a critical appraisal of the evidence, you're really looking at those quantitative and qualitative studies for rigor. A research critique is really an appraisal of the strengths and weaknesses of the study. And a good critique really looks at areas of adequacy and inadequacy in an unbiased manner. And you guys are going to do a critical appraisal of one article as a group. And that will at least give you your first foray, if you've not done it before, into looking at not only looking at an article for how it's set up, but looking at it for rigor. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you do that when we look at the difference between quantitative and qualitative studies. Really, lit reviews concern really the evaluation of a body of research, but you need to make sure that you're including an appraisal of those studies that you're including in your lit review. You don't want to include a study that doesn't have rigor. Once you have critiqued multiple studies, what you're going to do is create a group or a summary of those reviews to answer some of the broad questions of the way that you set up your research. Or what do you do? Is it good evidence to apply? And who is that evidence applicable for? So you don't want to use something that was done in a PEDS group for an adult population if it's not appropriate. And this is called generalizability. So once all the relevant studies have been retrieved, read, abstracted, and appraised, the information has to be analyzed and integrated. A literature review is not just simply a summary of each previous study. It is a synthesis. So what you're looking for is themes or generalizability or transferability. It's also going to tell you about what has been done and then why it'll give you justification if you're looking at doing your own research study on what should be the next steps. Attached are the steps or the guidelines for critiquing lit reviews. Next, we'll move on to further topics, including ethics in research, as well as some of the steps in setting up a research project.